great to be with you this morning to talk with Mark Bergel, the founder, president, and CEO of A Wider Circle, one of the great social service agencies in the region and across the country. Mark, I worry about you sometimes because you're someone who puts your all into your mission. So how are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting enough rest? Are you watching out for COVID and all that during this time?
You know, Doug, I appreciate that. I wouldn't mind seeing more indications of your care over time. You know, feel free to send more notes or anything else that would let me know how much you feel concerned. That'd be nice. Yeah, you know, I think when we went on lockdown on March 14th, you know, we didn't know exactly what to expect or how long to expect it. And it immediately became the busiest time I've ever had. And I've worked 7 days a week since starting the organization back in 2001. But there was an intensity to this that was very different because we had to think about protecting our staff and protecting our staff's families and serving people who were being left out and people who were going to be more socially isolated. And then, you know, what was going to happen to our funding, because so much of our funding is based on a typical grassroots approach, which is to say we have 30,000 volunteers a year. They are the ones who usually end up supporting the organization. And again, those $25 and $50 donations. And we also get about 35,000 in-kind donations, people dropping off stuff. And that also leads to relationship building. So we were concerned on every front, but we immediately focused on trying to protect the team, keep the team intact. And so we started looking at what our fundraising efforts would have to be. Luckily, we did secure PPP, and there was a philanthropic spirit in the spring. I'm sure everybody knows that and saw that in their own organizations. And so we were momentarily relieved from having to worry about the funding piece of that. But then we started thinking, okay, how are we going to serve? Because we were watching people, you know, really suffer, and people who are in the lowest income always suffer the most in things like this, and they're the last to receive benefits, and they receive the least amount of benefits, and it should be the opposite, right? We should flip that on its head. So it took us a little bit to figure out how we could serve and protect our staff at the same time. We started to distribute food, and so we became a part of the World Central Kitchen effort at Nats Park, delivering food into low-income communities. And now we have moved into phase one as of the early June time period. And in phase one, instead of furnishing 20 homes a day, we furnish about 10 to 12 homes a day. And instead of receiving, I don't know, 50, 60 drop-offs, we schedule donation drop-offs so we get about 2 or 3 an hour. So we phase down, we do all our job training work on Zoom or phone. So we've been able to stay active with people through job training. But you know, as I'm thinking about this, you asked about how I was doing, didn't you, Doug? And
yeah, you just spent 5 minutes talking about your organization and their mission. See, that's what I mean when I said you put your all into the mission. You didn't mention one thing about yourself. So how are you doing?
I guess to say a little stressed out by everything, and it's hard. But you know, I'm surrounded by really great staff members. I have leadership that's unbelievable, and that have sought to not have me do more than I should do. So the wider circle of 2 or 3 years ago is very different from what we have today. We're still a learning organization. We're struggling to make sure that we respond to the racial equity issues internally the way we need to. I don't think that we were active enough in that, even though we thought about it. And so we're pushing on that. So again, I'm kind of filled with all those things. I'm doing fine. I lost 30 pounds since the end of May. I'm on a health kick.
You're losing weight. You're stressed out. What are you doing to take care of yourself?
No, the losing weight's good. I was carrying around more than I needed to. So now I'm healthier.
Well, you're preaching the choir here, Mark. So
yeah, I'm healthier than I was. So physically healthier, emotionally, I'll come back to you with that answer. And spiritually trying to get a little more spiritually grounded, because you know everything I do is supposed to be based and it's supposed to be a spiritual kind of. It's a spiritual inspiration to do this kind of work and to do it the way I do it. So I'm trying to stay connected to that. And that's a challenge because there's a lot of, you know, temperatures are up everywhere. Everybody's got got a lot of strong opinions, and I'm trying to listen to them all internally and externally. So
So you talked about phase one and slowing things down some and less drop-offs, less deliveries and things. How are you mentioned, did I hear 25, 30,000 volunteers?
So usually we have about 30,000 volunteers a year. So we have about 2,500 people every month who come to a wider circle. And now we can have maybe 5 or 6, right? Because we're physical distancing, masking, not having groups come. So we are a very different organization with respect to that. And that's put on a little bit more work on the staff. And we also wanted to make sure the staff only came back to work if they felt safe. So we have some staff who did not feel safe coming back, and but it's worked out. Again, the team that provides, it's called our essential support staff. So the departments that make up that staff have been spending a lot of time making sure that we are well informed on COVID and that our policies and procedures are protective of everyone. So yeah, so very few volunteers. And when people drop off donations or come to pick up donations, they stay in their vehicles. Doesn't mean it happens every time. Some people come out, want to look at stuff, but we try to keep it very contained so we can serve in a safe way. Because for all this going on, there are still thousands and thousands of people who don't have beds and don't have other essentials in their home. They're living in quite deep scarcity. So we're trying to stay true to that piece of our mission.
So you talked about adapting some and slowing down what you normally do and switching to delivering meals. How's the meal delivery going? Are you still doing that?
Yeah, the meal delivery went well. I think that we've moved past that now. As we went into phase one, we kind of phased that out a little bit. We're still providing essential items, of which food is one of them. But volunteers have picked that up, and that whole process has changed over time. So we are less engaged with that, handed it off to some volunteers, and now are serving hardcore with our furniture and home goods and those services that we used to do.
And you talked about the learning services all being on Zoom. How's that going? What's that like?
That's been surprisingly good, Doug. We spent a lot of time talking with folks we were serving to see how they could access resources. So we first kind of said, here's what you could do to get Zoom. Here's how you could, increase your technology, and here's how we can continue to work together. We brought in more job coaches. So that is another great way for people to help, is to become a job coach. And we've had Zooms where we've had, 10 job coaches, 10 job seekers. And even in the main Zoom, we then break out into, breakout rooms so people can get more individualized attention. So I would say that our workforce development team, which has always been extremely compassionate, has really doubled down on trying to be very individualized in their support of people.
So have you seen demand for your services increase dramatically since this started 4 months ago? Are you able to place people into jobs now, or is that very tough?
Yeah, it's a little more challenging because the jobs that first became available were jobs that put people at risk. Like some people would get security jobs at a shelter or security jobs where there were a lot of people, and so we weren't really comfortable with that process. So I think that's part of the narrative around essential workers and making sure that we don't put people in harm. You can easily do harm as you do good, and we really try to avoid that. It requires being quite holistic in this. So one thing we noticed right away, and which has continued, is we've spent a lot of time on the phone with those we serve. So the demand is still high, to answer your question, Doug. The people we serve are exceptionally understanding of the health crisis that's going on. And so they know that we can do what we can do, but we are spending 30 minutes on a phone call where we used to spend 3 minutes on a phone call. And we are providing resources for people, say, hey, look, here's where you can get access to healthcare. Here's where you can find housing support. Here's where you might be able to learn more about what assistance you can find. So that is what we saw almost right away in our work. Is we became very much a counseling agency. People who weren't used to counseling people, but the folks we serve need a lot more time because there is an intense social isolation, and people who in poverty, there tends to be some intense social isolation anyway, never mind in a public health crisis where you need to go on lockdown. So we've spent a lot of our time doing that type of work and connecting with mental health agencies to see where there's referrals that can be made. But the job piece of it's complicated because there's not a lot of economic activity for people we serve.
So the counseling, has that continued? Has that been steady and strong through the 4 or 5 months? Is that something that's been going on for some time?
Well, we just, during our staff meeting this morning, one of our staff just read a note they got from a client who said, I talked to one of your staff today, and it was incredible the spirit she brought to our conversation, and just, her energy and her compassion made me feel so much better. So I think that's responding to kind of the spiritual crisis that is a part of this public health crisis.
That's great to hear. That's a great testament. So Beverly Hudnut has a question about how are your neighborhood partners? How are you working with them? How's that going?
So I think everybody's facing similar issues. First of all, Beverly, you are the best. I love you, and I'm glad you're on this webinar. Nice to hear your voice, so to speak. I didn't
want to try to imitate her voice, so I just.
No.
But she's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had the blessing to meet her husband before he passed at a church where he attended, and I was able to speak. And boy, that was a highlight. When I think of my LGW highlights, it was that Beverly connected me with her husband. So anyway, the neighborhood partnerships work is, we're a part of the FFDC contract that the mayor gave to 9 different nonprofit organizations, each organization working in a particular neighborhood. We have a 5,000 person footprint in Southeast DC called Washington Highlands. And so that group is working hard, and CFSA, Child Family Services Agency, is pushing us to stay on track. So even though we have to do more virtual work, there is no slowdown in this kind of comprehensive program. So I would say, Beverly, that our partners are working hard. Some of the smaller nonprofits are not surviving. So they are reaching out to us to say, is there a way that they can share some resources before they go out of business? And so that's been a real downer. I think, many of you may have seen the article yesterday that said 10 to 40% of the nonprofit sector is going under right now. So the larger partners are still going, and they seem to be going strong, and those that were smaller are having a lot of trouble. So we're trying to figure out how to support them. But that's how it's going. And people in these communities, just to finish up, Doug and Beverly, people in these communities where we serve, like people in Washington Highlands, are struggling quite a bit, and the effects of poverty are stronger, more glaring than they've been.
Well, if you ever doubted there was racial inequity in our country, all you need to do is look at COVID and the effects of COVID and see who it's targeted and the results of that. So it's really, it's a very tragic time for us.
Yeah, and it's the case in urban areas, but it's also the case in suburban areas where you see immigrant population struggling, and in rural areas where you see people who are Black in rural areas, people who are white, people who are Indigenous Americans really struggling and fighting to figure out how they're going to get through this. There's a lot of anxiety, and so that's where our work is also focused, as we'll talk about in a bit.
So Edwin Washington's got a question about your statement of these nonprofits not making it, which is very sad, and that they're calling you and talking about resources. Are you looking to merge with any of them? Or are you looking to take over those resources? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's always a thought, because the sector, in a way, the nonprofit sector, maybe not too unlike the for-profit sector. There's a lot of groups that do similar things, and sometimes the way government and nonprofit sector are set up, somebody will have to jump through 8 hoops to get the support they need. And so, yeah, Doug, I think we haven't specifically thought about it, but some groups have talked to us about this. It's something I think we'll think about as we see what evolves going forward. But I think one of our ideas as we even roll out this notion of a national plan is that we need to simplify the assistance that people are trying to get. We need to simplify the safety net system, centralize it a little bit more, because each type of assistance has different processes and even different qualifications and different ways you prove a particular part of your need. And that really makes it hard, cumbersome, and almost impossible for many people to rise out of poverty. The safety net system is not, I'd say, as good as it could be.
That reminds me when I was back in Montgomery County and we took all of the different human service agencies and combined them into one department. And we went through did a couple case studies. And, and basically I asked, everybody was enthusiastic. Everybody said it's working better. And I said, what have you changed? And they said, we really haven't changed anything. It's just that we're now talking to each other and we see the client as somebody that we're all responsible for, as opposed to, well, that's that agency. I could just send it over there and let them worry about it. It's just sort of fascinating how when you start to bring that network together, how much more you can get done and how much more you can help people.
Yeah, I had higher hopes for what you would get done as a county executive. I'm just kidding, Doug. Just a little fun.
So did I, Mark. So did I.
No, but what you did is right. You are a man of action. And I think that's right, though. The inertia of this kind of fragmentation and fragmented system is too strong. We need significant change. And some of our LGW discussions over the past couple of years, including the book events, have talked about the swiftness of social change. And if anything, right now, that's our opportunity. And I think we need to seize that and ensure there's a swiftness to social change here. The wrongs that we need to right have been around for decades and decades, as I'll kind of continue to talk about. And I think there's an inertia to that. And it comes from, again, almost many of us seeing issues and wanting to help in a charitable way. We need to help in a committed social justice way. And as we know, if it's a justice issue, it's an immediate issue.
Well, this holistic approach, it always struck me as odd if someone said, well, gee, I did my little part. They're fine. I don't need to worry about this person anymore. I don't need to worry about this family. When they're struggling at all kinds of different levels and need help everywhere they can.
Yeah, I think that gets back to what you said initially. I mean, I didn't get into this to run a nonprofit organization or to provide furniture or even job skills. I mean, I didn't go to school for any of that. I came at this because this is a real wrong. I mean, poverty is something we can solve. We do have to commit to it. And I don't think that that's the mentality we've had. I think we've tried to help. But, Doug, that's why I don't care about my quality of life per se. I really care about the hell are we doing to let all these people live in such scarcity, surrounded by such abundance? I mean, it resonates with none of our spiritual traditions, none of our values, unless those really aren't our values. And that's what this is a time for those to come to the surface. We need to live our values. Love is a verb. It's not, I don't care about someone if I'm not doing something to solve the injustice they face every day. If I'm not solving that, then I don't really care. I just say I care.
If you could say there's any silver lining to this whole pandemic, it would be what I think you just talked about, where there's a much quicker urgency to solving problems, getting things done. There's much more innovation, much more agility. Organizations are doing things much more quickly and much more outside the box than they had been in the past. And we've had some time to think and reflect on that in the last 4 or 5 months. You're looking at this the poverty issue across the country, and you're proposing some things to help us solve that, to help us end poverty in the United States. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I would, and I'll just add to what you just said by saying that, when you meet with very learned people and you say, when do you think we can end poverty? I mean, they think they're being bold by saying, I think in 50 years, we can reduce it by 50%. And I think every time I hear that, I think, you don't have daily struggles. You're not living in an impoverished community where it's hard for you to walk outside without fearing for your life. Your kids are not going to a school that's been on lockdown 11 times in the past year, where it's funded because of property taxes. And so it's very scarcely funded, no extracurricular activities. That's obviously not your daily reality, or you wouldn't say 50 years, 50% reduction is good, and they think that's crazy bold. I think that's off the table. We have to do it much swifter than that. So yeah, to answer your question, Doug, we've been working on this national plan, just so my words are more actions. I'll share the screen if that's okay.
That'd be great.
This, let's see if I can, hold on one second. Any technological problems that I have in the next 30 minutes, I want to be forgiven for. Maybe chalk it up to stress. Let's see how I do. Okay, so this is our national plan to end poverty that we're working on. Now, this is a plan that we're going to release on September 26th. So we're still about 2 months away from launch, but it's what we've been working on quite a bit for a couple of years now, and I really started thinking about it 20 years ago, and then especially 10 years ago when, you know, when A Wider Circle started to get some recognition and awards, and it felt really empty because I'd go get this award and I started to care about it, you know, like, oh, good, this is going to be nice. Yay for me, yay for A Wider Circle. And then I'd get back to the office and I think this is really empty because not one person we serve is better off as a result. Now, maybe we have more exposure and that's good. I get the exposure. So we try to make sure that exposure is always the reason, you know, that we participate in those kind of things. But for the most part, people are in a situation where they're not getting out of poverty. If their life improves, it gets better and then it falls back. And so I'll share some of the reasons that happens and why that's informed this plan now. But this is our plan that is really focused on action. And I'll get to the action in a minute, but I think when I talk about ending poverty, what does that mean? And that means that everybody has at least a minimum economic kind of well-being, right? That everybody has a quality of life that is at least acceptable, because we use a standard of measurement of need of 50% of median income. And I'm going to go to that right now. So the poverty line in the United States has really hurt people in poverty. It's marginalized people in poverty instead of helping people in poverty. And a great way to understand that is to just select a state. Let's just select where I sit right now, which is in Maryland, in Montgomery County. And this is a part of our plan. This is kind of the teaching part. But again, the focus of our plan here at A Wider Circle is going to be action. But just for now, I'll show you kind of what goes into it. So I clicked on Montgomery County, Maryland, to show what somebody needs to get by in this county compared to what the poverty line is. The bottom row is the poverty line. So these are the numbers. If you're a family of 4, for example, in the United States, you are only considered in poverty if you make $26,200 or less. And that is really embarrassing that we use that as a standard. So in other words, if you make $35,000 per year as a family of 4, you're not considered in poverty. And because you're over 130% above this poverty line, you lose your food benefits. Now, what A Wider Circle has kind of decided to use as our standard is 50% of median income. 50% of median income in Montgomery County for a family of 4 is $72,223. Now that 50% of median income is pretty time tested. It's used in Europe. It's been used by housing in the United States since the 1930s as a standard of what somebody needs assistance if they are below 50% of median income. So the fact that this is $46,000 difference means that somebody who makes $35,000, as they try to rise out of poverty, they lose their benefits. They lose their food benefits, then they lose other benefits. In fact, there are so many benefits that are based on the poverty line. These are some of them. So you can see here's SNAP, but all of these other benefits are based on the poverty line or some multiplier of it. Okay, and that is really dangerous because as we see, the poverty line is so low. So the fact that people lose their benefits as they're trying to increase their quality of life shows that we have a system that makes people kind of increase and then fall back in poverty. And so you see that a lot. Now, what you notice right away is that when we change the standards, and by the way, the standards change by county. So A Wider Circle has gone into every county in the United States and come up with what the standard should be, making sure nobody drops below a statewide standard. And that's because, well, first, the number is we wanted to ensure people had a quality of life, and also a lot of benefits are doled out at the state level. So we thought a statewide level was the minimum. So you can see there are counties like Allegheny and Garrett and Baltimore County that have similar numbers, whereas Montgomery and Howard have higher numbers. Carroll County is higher numbers because the median incomes are higher. And this is a lot of wonky stuff that I would love to talk about with someone, whoever wants to reach out to me. I would love to talk about this. But if you just want to count then, okay, how many people are really living in need? You just change it over to the number of people below the standard. And you can see that in the state of Maryland, where there's 5,900,000, according to the poverty line, we would say there's only 527,000 people, or 8.9%, living below poverty. And you might even feel like that's pretty good, but it's not. And actually the situation is worse because 1,300,000 do not have enough money to get by each day. And that's 22.8%. And in the county of Montgomery, where the poverty numbers would tell you 76,000 people live in poverty, we would tell you that 222,000 people do not have enough money to get by. More than 20% of Montgomery County residents live in some type of financial and economic stress every day. That's much different than 7.3% and 76,000. So that's one thing we wanted to bring out front. We need to get rid of the poverty line. Talk about swiftness of social change. We need to replace the poverty line, and we would like to replace it what we call our wider circle income standards. And I think it's defensible. It's different than what some other groups use, but those are conversations we'd love to have. What we then did, Doug, is we mapped the whole country. Now this map is going to move a little slowly because we're still, again, in development form. So forgive the time frame. Let's see how long it takes the map to pop up. So there it is. I'll just zoom in a little bit. And what we did is we mapped the entire country. It's a heat map. So the darker the blue, the more people live below the income standards that we have set. And you can see there are parts of rural America where there are indigenous Americans where the numbers are really deep in poverty. And you could put in here any county you want and find something out. But let's say we want to zoom in on this area a little bit where we are. And let's see if I can use this map. So far, so good. Now that I veered off into the tornado area today. So here you go. Let's just say you want to go into Baltimore and you want to help. Well, with this map, you can see where your help is needed most. Southwest Baltimore, right? And it's no coincidence that the farther you go to the northwest, the northeast, the whiter, W-H-I-T-E-R, it gets, and the more affluent it gets, until you get out to counties where you have less than 10% of the people living below our income standards, where here in this part of Baltimore, you have 45% of the people living below an income standard that allows them to get by. So the map is really helpful, but those are just a couple of the tools.
Mark, can we look at DC for a little bit, where you've got east of the river?
Yeah.
Trouble, as everyone knows, but I think this lets you put some data on it.
It's the same racial movement in terms of how white this area is and how black this area is, and the number of people who live, 46%, much like Baltimore, and up here it's 8%. That's pretty dramatic and unequal, inequitable, and so we know where the resources need to go, and not over time, but immediately, including, Doug, the resources as people try to get through this public health crisis. When we are able to find vaccinations or therapeutics or whatever will allow people to get back to work, they need to go here first, right? That's what it means, that those with the greatest need are our greatest priority. Not to people who can get them and pay for them first, but people who need them first. That's where that is.
And if you overlaid a map of life expectancy on top of this, I think it would be very, very similar.
30 years difference, Doug, between life expectancy here and life expectancy here. 30 years. That's pretty embarrassing and so that's why the urgency I felt in 2001 is what I feel today. I'm just a little more hopeful that social change can happen quicker. So the action guide is still the key. This is still an action guide, but I want to just share a couple more quick things that this plan will have. It has, for example, the history of our efforts to end poverty. We're still working on 2010 to 2020, but you can track back when this site goes live, and you can read about the Affordable Care Act, and you can read about, and so it's kind of an overview. I'll show you a more detailed element of this behind. Go back to No Child Left Behind, and did that work? And then what about the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act of 1996? That was really detrimental to people in poverty, even though it was supposed to be helpful. It reinforced mischaracterizations of people in poverty and therefore allowed us to mishandle how we responded to their situations. It goes all the way back into the 80s and 70s. And wait a minute, it looks like it goes back even further. Yeah, it does. It goes back to 1722, but I'll go back up here. Here's where the New Deal was launched. And so we talk about, what was launched during the New Deal in just a very kind of overview way. Hold on, I have trouble with technology, so I'll go back. Then it goes, through even what happened during the 1800s as we started to kind of understand poverty, and the timeline goes all the way back to 1349 to what happened across the pond a little bit, that really shaped the way we treat people in poverty. And so we spend a lot of time on all these things so that people can understand why are we in the situation we're in. And then also we provide really deep information on all of these different programs like Head Start, Pell Grants, Title I funding, Medicaid, Medicare, all the way down to TANF. And you know, you could just click on any one of those and see kind of the history of TANF, how states spend federal and state funds, et cetera. So there's a lot of learning here and a lot of doing pretty good on technology, I'd say. A lot of ways that people can then learn how to, we have a glossary with terms, and then we have a session where people will be able to share their experiences. So this interact session, this site will be a really interactive site. It won't be static. It'll be living document type of stuff. So people can always add and they can share how they overcame poverty or if they started a program. So we can really learn all the while. And it's very much a program that will include everybody's engagement. But the key that I'll just go into in the interest of time is this action guide. So any of you who are watching, if you want to, you would be able to select an identity. And let's just say you wanted to help either as a philanthropic organization or a person with lived experience, a nonprofit, an individual. Let's just choose business at the top. You could select business and you could select your area of interest. And let's say education were your area of interest. It would give you 6 things you could do right now, right? And let's just say you wanted to partner with underfunded schools. We would tell you how, but we would also give you a best practice. So this is how US Navy personnel from the VP 62 Squadron go to low-income schools every Thursday afternoon to assist students. And it tells you other ways that other companies, partnerships big and small with corporations and schools are doing this work. So there's 550 actions you can take. And let's just say you were interested in childcare and you really wanted to learn more. So now there's 4 childcare ways that you could help out. And let's say I'm trying to figure out which one. Yeah, so here's what you could do as a company to help your employee with childcare. And if you wanted to learn, well, this is great. I guess I understand that I could get a full-time drop in daycare, but what's really working? Well, there's some great notes you could learn here, or you could just look at what Salesforce or Patagonia are doing to provide childcare. So for every single thing we do, there are best practices that follow this up.
And Mark, what I love about this is too many times people look at poverty or any issue and say, well, that's a government problem. We'll let the government take care of that.
Right.
We'll fight it that way, as opposed to it's a community problem, it's a societal problem.
Right.
And how do we come together? So here you've got all kinds of ways for all kinds of individuals and organizations to do some things that don't rely on the government that can help start addressing the problem right away. I think that's good.
I think so, Doug. I think, people say, well, how much, we spend over $1 trillion on poverty and poverty programming in the country per year. And the more that other sectors get in and the more that we as individuals engage. So here's how individuals can help with childcare, right? Here's 6 different ways. And if you want to learn more, you just click on the best practice. But the more that all these sectors do, Doug, the less it will cost government to engage.
Yeah. We've got a question from Mike Tryon about wanting to hear your thoughts on Mayor Michael Tubbs from Stockton, California, and his approach to establishing basic income as the road out of structural inequity.
That's a great question. And I think the verdict is still out. They've extended that program another 6 months. I think in July they extended it because I still think they're trying to figure out what's the outcome going to be. But that program, Mike, just like in DC right now, is part of an effort to get cash in people's hands right away, which makes sense. Not as the be-all, end-all solution, but as a step in the right direction. So I think that individual is deeply committed. I think that we need more leaders like that, and he's somebody who's risen out of economic need to be in a leadership position, so he knows of what he speaks, and he's really connected to the citizens, whether it's in schools or getting other community leaders. So what's happening there is, I would say it's promising, but it's been extended without still getting a sense of what's ultimately going to happen with that program.
I'd love to see more interest from the federal government. I know they talk about a lot about expanding the earned income tax credit. I think that's one of the most effective anti-poverty tools that government can provide. And Montgomery County was the first local jurisdiction in the country to have a local earned income tax credit. The state of Maryland's talked about expanding theirs. A lot of talk, but they just say we can't afford it and just keep moving. But I do think, as you said, getting cash in the hands of people is an extraordinary help.
It's priorities, Doug, and you know that. I mean, you know better than maybe any of us here what has to happen with priorities, that everybody puts their priorities in the mix and compromises get made. So at what point do we say those with the greatest need are our greatest priority? That's the point. And I try to learn that even in my own team. I'm still trying to work with that as we talk about even racial equity, but across the board, those with the greatest need to be the greatest priority. And that is not how decisions have been made. We all know that. But this is our chance to do that. And this plan that I was sharing is a way of saying nobody has to sit on the sideline. In fact, if you're not picking from 50 things that you could do right away, then you don't care enough. And that's okay. As some people tell me, Mark, if you don't care enough, just say that. So I know. But the answer is we want to care enough. And so this plan is a way that we can provide a pathway for everybody to get involved. I do think it's a cop-out that we don't all prioritize those who are in the greatest need. And this plan is a way to say, look, we're not telling government what to do. We're saying every one of us, here's an action step, a more informed action step, because it could cost government's money if they change the poverty line, you know, Doug, and they say, okay, now I see your income standard, Mark, and we want to adopt your income standard, but that's going to cost us a lot. And my response is, not if all the sectors get involved, it won't, right? Because we can think much broader than we've thought. We put ourselves in these little boxes all the time. We need to think much more broadly than that. And faith communities and civic associations and businesses need to be problem solvers of poverty, because it's all together or it's not. Either we're in this together or we're not. We love to say at the beginning of COVID that we were in it together. We soon had to take that statement back because we realized we weren't in it together, that people in poverty were suffering much more than people who are not in poverty. But we can still be in it together. It's just going to take more of a commitment. And something I need to learn too. I'm not on the high horse, by the way.
I do think that the mood in the country is changing. And I'll just use homelessness as an example of that, where, you know, 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, the philosophy was, if you're going to come to a homeless shelter, you've got to sign a statement of conduct. You've got to commit yourself to doing these things. And if you don't, we're not going to take it. So you're just, see you later. And now I think the predominant thinking in homelessness is just get them housed. Get them housed. Take care of the immediate need, get them housed, and then you can work on the other problems. But if you're going to end homelessness, you got to find housing for people as opposed to putting all these roadblocks in front of them before you provide them housing. I think that's a remarkable turnaround there, and hopefully we'll start to see that in other areas as well.
It's remarkable from a limited perspective in my mind. If we're going to be human, then let's be human here. That person is your brother. It's your mother. What would you do for your mother? Would you just put them in a house and not worry about all the other benefits, or would you serve that person holistically? It's got to be holistic, and to your point, housing first, but everything else with it.
Yes.
That's how we have to do it. I mean, this is about our humanity here. It's always been about our humanity, and it's not about slow change, and it's not about steps. We see that in other social movements, right? This is a time for that kind of change. And when we do it, by the way, when we end poverty or provide a minimum level of economic well-being for people, what we do is we unleash their talent and their creativity and their innovation. So individuals can start to see what's possible in their lives, and we can start to see as a society what's possible. Because instead of this, you know, fighting around this, we can do this. That's the whole point.
So we have a lot of excitement in the chat room about the national plan and people wanting to sign on, implement, and all that. Talk about the distribution of it, talk about the rollout of it, and how, if people want to be involved with this, what they can do.
Sure. So we're 2 months away, and obviously I couldn't show everything here, the different lenses we're going to overlay onto
2 months away from what?
From our launch.
Okay.
From making that website public. So the URL is something people can actually see, you know, and go to. So we could use readers. There are people in this audience who know more about their areas than I do, and their areas are on the plan. So we would love partners. So if people want to be on an advisory panel with their area of expertise, or if they want their companies to be founding partners And founding partners mean you also read, you spread the word. It's not just a financial thing. It doesn't have to be a financial thing, but we could use readers. And if you're in the private sector and you want to help, we could really use your ideas on implementation and or businesses embracing of this. If you're a civic leader, you know, a Rotary, Kiwanis, any of those groups, and you think you could help with that, all of those sectors that I showed, if you're in any of these sectors and you're a leader, so in business or in civic or in educational, healthcare, or a nonprofit leader, we would love to have you kind of come on and help read. And we have no ego in this, so we're not trying to provide a wider circle's best plan. We're trying to provide the best plan for the country. And so if you work in any of these areas, you may know a lot more about transportation, which is at the heart of poverty, the lack of transportation access and the marginalization and neglect that results in kind of transportation inequities. And please, you know, reach out and we would love to have you engage. And so all of these areas, you may work in financial stability or you may work in, you know, health. All of those have tremendous inequities. And you can see that every time I click, there's new things for businesses to do. But Doug, that's what I would say. We could use a lot of help.
But how do we do that? We want to get involved before your rollout in the end of September. What do? We email you? What do we do?
Email Mark, M-A-R-K, at awidercircle.org.
Mark at awidercircle.org.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll
what other ways, other than the national plan, Lisa Rother, Mahan Tavakali have asked, what are other ways we could help a wider circle with your mission?
Well, I think that, you know, it's always about, like any nonprofit, it's always time, stuff, and money. So if there's a way you want to volunteer your time or, you know, set up a Zoom, if any of you want to set up a Zoom for a wider circle so we can share what we're doing, that's a communications, you know, effort that we could really use. If you wanted to become a job coach, you could become a job coach. Even now, we could help you to become a job coach. And if you want to do a drive at your home or in your community in a physically, you know, distanced way, and then bring those items to a wider circle, that would be great. If you want to call manufacturers of furniture like Temper or Sealy and say, what are you doing with that 2% of your inventory that you don't use? Give that to a wider circle right now. We're getting 3,700 beds in the next week, 3,700 beds in the next week delivered to us. And I think that that's the kind of donations we need. That's coming from, I believe, a university and maybe Georgetown. So if anybody wants to throw a chat who's on my team who knows that answer, I would love to see that. But I think that's a start. So let's go ahead and if we really are going to prioritize those in need, apply that kind of energy to your communications that you have in your economic circles. So that's one good way. Be on the lookout for volunteering and you know, we'll be in communication on that. And of course, you know, funding is always great.
So we've got a lot of questions in the chat about the national plan, interest in it, of suggestions for it. We're not going to have time to get to them today, but we are going to forward those to you as part of the chat and have you take a look at those, and hopefully we'll get a response to that.
Yeah, I appreciate that because that will help me stay focused and not worry about other things. This plan is a big thing. We've been pointing to it for a long, long time. And to Mahan's point, it was Georgetown. Hoya Saxa, that must be some inside thing that Georgetown folks do. But you know what? I'm grateful to Georgetown right now because that's where we're getting tons of stuff. So thanks, Mahan.
Good, good. So what leadership lessons have you learned over the last 5 months?
Yeah, I think the first thing I've tried to do organizationally is flatten our structure and trust. I've really had to look myself in the mirror and say, do I trust my team enough at all levels? And I don't think I was living that way. I don't think it was evident, even in my heart, if I felt that it wasn't evident to people. So I've tried to you know, make sure that people who were leading and or middle management or even entry-level positions felt much more valued and had the ability to impact their daily work than they may have felt that they had. So that's one thing. And I think that, you know, I don't want to say the word balance because I've fought balance in my life to make this commitment, this vow of service, but I have seen the evenings be much more valuable for me to turn off than they used to be. I didn't used to turn it off. And I would just say to other leaders out there, I could use a little bit of support on issues where I'm lacking a little bit. I haven't done that because I haven't found over time, you know, Doug, one thing that I found frustrating until I met LGW, to be honest. LGW was the first leadership experience I had that was positive. And it was so awesome because you and Debbie made low-income communities and issues a big part of every session for us. We went to Chicago. We had other people visit. It was, to me, it was the first time I had been in a leadership group where it wasn't about just how I was doing or how are you doing or taking care of yourselves. I get that more than I used to get that. But in this kind of vow of service, I want outcomes for people in poverty. It's not acceptable. But I have learned the value of trying to get some quality time that's outside, time off to have better time on.
So you talked about the donation of beds from Georgetown University. Any other good news you want to share with us?
Well, we have gotten some new space as well to house that. So we have more room in case anybody knows of large donations of stuff or manufacturers. If any of you work with manufacturers of stuff, that would be wonderful for us. We have our virtual community ball coming up. That's where we're launching this plan, I should say that. See, that's why I'm not even really in a marketing mindset, because I want this plan to be good. But our virtual community ball is when we will launch this national plan. So if anybody wants to participate in that, that'd be lovely. I'm sure Amy, our senior vice president, would love for me to put a plug in for the virtual community ball. So consider that a plug.
Now, you just talked about your time or your experience at LGW, and you're on our board now. And can I just ask you to sort of go over that? Because when you came into your class, you were not enthusiastic. You were like, okay, people told me to do this, I'm going to do it, and just try to get out of it. And then there was a change that happened during the year, and you become a very enthusiastic supporter of ours and leader of ours. So.
Yes, I think that one session you guys did some subtle brainwashing, and we didn't know it, and so it happened to me. No, I would say that the first thing that I noticed was in my mind trust, there were a few people like who were just so great. Mike Tryon's in my mind trust, and Donna Wilson, Shannon Hawkins, Rebecca Lindner, Beverly, and they were so high quality folks, and I was like, geez, these people are great. I need to open my mind up here, because the morning session before we did the mind trust, I remember a couple people telling me, Mark, you looked about as disinterested as a person could look. And I thought, well, I thought I was hiding that, so I'm sorry I didn't do that very well. But by the afternoon of the first day, Doug, I think I started to say, this could be different. But it was because of the people who became a part of LGW. And then by the third session, your leadership, which I had hoped going into it, I just thought, if Doug Duncan is leading this, or I shouldn't say it, it's gonna make you feel good about yourself, but if Doug Duncan is leading this, then I really should have more of an open mind, and you and Debbie proved to be just as good as can possibly be leading a leadership organization in my mind. And you take on issues that you're not comfortable with and that you're not experienced with, but you dive into them. You don't have any ego, but you didn't have any trouble calling us. I think you called us, Doug, as our team nickname. What was it? The group with a few screws loose. What was that name you gave us? Not the sharpest tools in the shed.
Not the sharpest tools was my name for your class. You didn't pick that as your class name, but yeah, you thought it was a great name for you.
Yeah, not the sharpest tools. I find that somewhat abusive, but I still thought that I loved, and in all truth, I love everything about the leadership. And we just had a great board session, and now Mahan has taken over, and done. He's so spirited, and the board is so full of spirit. So I can't speak highly enough about LGW. I just hope, however, that LGW and LGW members take seriously the notion of the swiftness of social change, and the notion of commitment versus contribution. Commitment is a far different word, and I think we need to commit as if our mom is in real risk of being able to survive another day, because that's what poverty brings to people. And you see it everywhere in every city, the amount of violent crime because of the economic distress, and we need to respond to that with compassion and commitment.
Mark, I want to thank you for this conversation today. It's really been enlightening. It's been inspiring. We're all looking forward to the rollout of your national plan. I want to thank PNC for sponsoring these Frontline Conversations with LGW, or for LGW. Let me just give you the final word.
Well, again, I think this is about our commitment. Leadership to me means those with the greatest need become our greatest priority. It's leadership in every way. We don't have to look anywhere else to engage in this. That's what the national plan is about. It's about taking action ourselves. But as we do that, I think it's right to also expect elected officials to engage, but it's right to expect our peers to engage and to have the conversations about this. So I would just say, look in the mirror and what does commitment mean? And what do you say you care about and what do you do about that?
Mark, thank you very much. It's been a great morning with you. And thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.